Hey, before we begin, take just 1 second and subscribe to this channel because stories like this, real stories about real people who quietly build things that change industries, don't get told enough. All right, let me tell you mine. My name is Tom Wagner. I'm 55 years old, and I've been a manufacturing engineer since Ronald Reagan was still in office. That I started on the factory floor at 23, sweeping metal shavings, getting yelled at by supervisors who barely knew my name, and slowly, year by year, learning how machines actually behave when nobody's watching. That I've survived 3 recessions, 2 plant closures, and more corporate restructuring initiatives than I can count. And I learned one rule early. If you keep your head down and make the system work better, they'll leave you alone to tea leaves. That's what I thought. The last morning my key card worked that Tuesday morning. My key card still worked when I swiped into the plant. That I didn't know it yet. But it would be the last time that I was juggling a lukewarm cup of coffee and a stack of production reports. When something felt off, the adaptive production control system, the same one I've been monitoring for 8 years, was throwing error codes I had never seen before. Not warnings, not noise, real errors. And that scared me because that system didn't hiccup. That IT adjusted. It learned. It adapted. That was the whole point. Now here's the thing. That system, the one executives were calling our revolutionary efficiency platform, was mine. But nobody upstairs talked about that. A $275 million lie, you see. Our company, Pinnacle Manufacturing, had just landed on the radar of a $275 million acquisition. Tech Flow Industries, big players, sharp engineers, serious money. And suddenly, everyone cared about the system. Everyone, except the people who built it. I was 4 tabs deep into diagnostic logs, cross-referencing sensor data with adaptive response algorithms. When my phone buzzed out a text from Preston Caldwell. Why boss? Thank for all the hard work during due diligence. Coffee's on me today. Grab you something from that fancy place downtown. Why got back to my desk? There was that $6 latte and a sticky note. Keep doing what you do best. No need to join the buyer call today. Confidential executive stuff. Thanks again. The handwriting was too neat. His assistant wrote it. That's when I knew something was wrong because the system wasn't theirs. Here's what nobody knew. I didn't build that system at Pinnacle. I built it years earlier. After I got laid off from Midwest Steel in 2016, I was consulting out of my garage. Space heater buzzing, coffee brewing at 2 a.m. while my wife Linda watched me fill notebook after notebook with control equations. PID loops, statistical process control models, 0.2 solid years. NO team. No budget, just stubbornness and fear. Because when you've been burned once, you learn to protect yourself. The paperwork everyone forgot about back then. I filed everything under my consulting LLC, Wagner Industrial Solutions, provisional patents, trademark applications, ownership clauses, the whole 9 yards. Something told me, don't dissolve this company. When Pinnacle hired me full-time 4 years later, I didn't. I shoved the incorporation papers into a filing cabinet, paid the renewal fees out of habit, and forgot about it. Until now, why people respected me and why executives didn't on the plant floor. People trusted me because I'd worked their jobs. That I knew what happened when humidity changed cardboard stiffness, or when tool wear threw cutting tolerances off by 0.5 millimeter, or when pushing throughput past 87% caused bottlenecks no spreadsheet could predict. Managers love the reports. 23% reduction in material waste, 18% improvement in throughput, $12 million in annual savings. Sales couldn't explain how it worked. Legal barely knew I existed. And I wasn't invited to steak dinners with TechFlow, where executives wore matching polo shirts and talked about synergistic operational paradigms. That was fine that I didn't want the spotlight, that I just wanted the system to work. Until they started rewriting history once the acquisition talks got serious. Things changed. Consultants appeared like termites after rain. Suddenly, Preston was the visionary architect behind the automation platform. Why System Access started getting reorganized. Meetings I used to lead were scheduled when I was on the floor fixing problems. Even my own project tickets got reassigned to external consultants charging $300 an hour to ask me questions about documentation I had written myself that I told myself. This is normal. Big deals are messy. Carlos Rivera, one of the younger engineers I mentored, pulled me aside. Tom, can I show you something? He pointed at his laptop, a dependency manifest, and there was buried deep Wagner Industrial Solutions / Adaptive Control Core v2.3.1 my namespace. From years ago. My stomach dropped because suddenly everything made sense that night. I went home, opened the fireproof box in my basement, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the papers that would change everything. And that's where part 2 begins. Because once you realize someone is selling your work as their own, you have two choices: stay quiet or remind them who actually built the system. After that morning, after the latte, after being quietly pushed out of a meeting I should have been leading, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not loud wrong. Not obvious wrong. The kind of wrong you feel in your gut, the kind that comes from experience. That I went back to my desk and stared at the control system dashboard again. Same system, same code, same fingerprints. Mine had I been watching that dashboard for 8 years straight. I knew its moods better than I knew most people. When it hiccuped, when it lagged, when it threw errors nobody else noticed, it was usually trying to tell me something. And that morning, it was screaming that I caught the fault before it cascaded into a full line stoppage. Adjusted the adaptive response thresholds, rebalanced the feedback loop, problem solved. No announcement. No thanks. Just another quiet save. That's how it had always been. You see, inside Pinnacle Manufacturing, nobody really cared how the system worked. They cared about numbers. 23% less waste, 18% more throughput, $12 million a year in savings. Those numbers made executives smile. Those numbers made sales teams confident. Those numbers were about to make someone very rich. Just not me. That I wasn't bitter. Not yet. You don't survive 3 decades in manufacturing by expecting applause. You keep your head down. You document everything. You let the work speak. And for a long time, that worked. The floor supervisors respected me because I'd done their jobs. I knew what it meant when cardboard stiffness changed with humidity. I knew what toolware sounded like before a machine ever failed. They trusted me. Executives like Preston, they tolerated me that I wasn't on the website, wasn't invited to steak dinners, didn't wear matching polo shirts, and talk about synergistic paradigms. I was the guy who made sure the light stayed on, and that made me invisible. Until TechFlow showed up, that's when everything changed. Suddenly there were consultants everywhere. Clipboards, tablets, buzzwords. Preston started using phrases like my platform and our proprietary methodology. My platform, our methodology. That I noticed my calendar changing. Meetings I used to lead moved. Decisions I used to make deferred. Why System Access got reorganized. For security. That word again. Security. That's when Carlos came to see me. Carlos Rivera. Mid-30s. Sharp kid. Reminded me of myself back when I still believed competence was enough. That he pulled up his laptop and lowered his voice. Tom, can I show you something? I leaned over his screen. There it was, buried deep in the dependency manifest at a namespace I hadn't seen in years. Wagner Industrial Solutions / Adaptive Control Core / V 2.3.1. I felt my stomach drop. That wasn't supposed to be there. That name belonged to a different time, a harder time. Back when I was working out of my garage after Midwest Steel laid me off in 2016. Back when I was filling notebooks at 2 in the morning, trying to build something that mattered. That night, I barely slept. When I got home, I went straight to the basement, to the fireproof box, moved aside Linda's grandmother's jewelry, our insurance papers, and there it was, the folder, articles of incorporation, business license, provisional patents, Wagner Industrial Solutions LLC, still active. Still mind, I remembered writing that ownership clause at 2 a.m., sitting next to a space heater, hands shaking from too much coffee to tea the time. It felt paranoid. Now, it felt prophetic that I cracked open a beer. A real one. Logged into the Ohio Secretary of State website. Active status. Fees paid. No dissolution. Just like that, my old company was alive again. The next few days felt surreal. Tech flow engineers walked the floor. And here's the thing, they actually understood the work. Point one of them, senior engineer, about my age, pulled me aside. This system is impressive, she said. The adaptive logic, the SBC integration, who designed it? Before I could answer, Preston appeared, like clockwork. That's proprietary, he said. Team effort. She nodded politely, but her eyes told me everything. She knew, and so did I. That all-hands meeting came fast at Dale Donuts. Broken projector. Preston sweating through his tie. 200 employees waiting to hear their fate. When he announced the $275 million acquisition, the room applauded. That I didn't. Because when he started talking about the revolutionary efficiency platform, I realized something very clearly. They weren't just ignoring me. They were erasing me, selling my work as theirs, and they thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't fight. They were wrong. Pause, slow inhale, because that night, I made a decision, and once a manufacturing engineer decides something, there's no stopping the process. By Thursday afternoon, everything changed, not loudly. Not dramatically, just quietly. That I was down on line 3, running diagnostics like I'd done 1,000 times before. One bearing running hot. Nothing serious yet, but it would be if ignored. I pulled out my tablet, logged in, access denied. That I blinked. Tried again, access denied. That I switched systems. Quality management, access denied. Production control server, access denied. That's when it hit me. They didn't just lock me out of a project. They locked me out of my own system. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the machines. The same machines I'd tuned, optimized, saved millions with, and suddenly, I was a guest. Carlos appeared beside me. Too quiet, too careful. Tom, they pulled your access. Everywhere. I didn't look at him yet. I already knew. Preston says it's security protocol. Sensitive negotiations. Security protocol. Yet I finally turned to Carlos. What else? He hesitated, then leaned in. They're editing the documentation. Commit histories. Author names. They're wiping the trail. That was the moment. Not when they locked me out. Not when Preston took credit. But when they tried to pretend I never existed. 32 years in manufacturing teaches you something important. Mistakes happen. Egos happen. Corporate nonsense happens. But erasing the truth, that's a declaration of war. Carlos swallowed. They asked me to clean up the dependencies. Remove external references. I smiled. Just a little. And did you? He shook his head, told them it'd take weeks. Risky. Could break the system. Smart kid. Because what Preston didn't understand, what he never bothered to learn, was that my fingerprints weren't cosmetic. They were structural. Every module. Every library. Every configuration file, all hardwired back to Wagner Industrial Solutions. You could delete my name from slide deck, but you couldn't delete me from the machine. That afternoon, I walked to Preston's office, didn't knock that he was on a call. Legal voices. Nervous energy that I stood in the doorway until he noticed me, that he muted the call, smiled that fake executive smile. Tom, what can I do for you? You revoked my system access. Temporary. Standard procedure. Above my role, he added, above my role. The man who couldn't explain a PLC ladder logic diagram telling me I was above my role, that I nodded slowly. And who's handling the technical transfer? I am. TechFlow needs strategic oversight. Strategic oversight from a guy who once asked me if TCP IP needed antivirus software, that I nodded again. Well then, I said calmly. Sounds like you've got it handled. His smile widened. Appreciate the team player attitude. I turned and walked away. No argument. No threats, because arguments are for people without leverage. That night, I didn't call my lawyer. I went home, but I spread everything out on the kitchen table. Papers, folders, hard drives, like preparing for trial or war, incorporation certificate, patent drafts, notary stamps, Git logs with timestamps older than Pinnacle's system itself, and then the gold in email from Pinnacle's former CTO, thanking me for independently developing the adaptive algorithms before integration. Dated. Signed. Proof. Linda found me there near midnight. You're really doing this, she said quietly. I looked up. 32 years, I said. I'm tired of watching people like Preston get rich off other people's work. She didn't argue, just squeeze my shoulder. Then fight smart, she said. Not angry. The next morning, I called Jordan, send the letter. The demand letter went out at 4:47 p.m. Professional. Polite. Unbreakable. No threats. Just one simple truth. They were trying to sell something they didn't own. 2 hours later, my phone exploded. Carlos. Supervisors. Whispers. Then silence, because fear had entered the building. The next morning, Preston was waiting by my truck, tie crooked, eyes red. Desperation has a smell. Tom, he said, this is killing the deal. Funny how it was suddenly our deal. TechFlow's lawyers are asking questions. Good, I said calmly. We don't own that system. He snapped. I pulled out my phone, set on the hood. For the record, I said softly, when exactly did I build it? He froze. Didn't know. Never had. That was his mistake. That I picked up the phone. Have a good morning, Preston, and walked inside. By evening, the boardroom was on fire. Carlos texted updates like a sportscaster. TechFlow lawyers say your docs are solid. CEO looks furious. Preston's sweating. By 6 p.m., it was over. The deal wasn't dead, but Preston's version of reality was. Patricia Henley met me in the parking lot. We should talk, she said. With my attorney, I replied. She nodded. Monday, for the first time in a long time, I slept well. I didn't sleep much that weekend, not because I was scared, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt awake. Why kitchen table looked like a crime scene. Papers everywhere, patents and corporation documents, printed emails, old notebooks with coffee stains and greasy fingerprints. 32 years of work, laid out like evidence. Linda came in around midnight. Didn't say much, just set a mug of coffee next to me and rested her hand on my shoulder. You're really doing this, she said quietly. I looked up at her, and for the first time, I didn't shrug it off. Yeah, I said, I am. She nodded. No lectures, no fear, just one sentence that stuck with me. Then do it right, not angry. That Monday morning, I didn't walk into Pinnacle as an employee. I walked in as the owner of Wagner Industrial Solutions, LLC. Same parking lot. Same smell of oil and metal. Same old walls, different power. The emergency board meeting was already happening upstairs. I wasn't invited, but Carlos texted me like a sports commentator. Preston's sweating. TechFlow Legal looks serious. CEO just asked how this IP slipped through. I leaned back in my chair and waited. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. This is Patricia Henley, CEO of Pinnacle Manufacturing. Her voice was calm. Too calm. We need to talk immediately. I smiled a little. Of course, I said, with my attorney present. Long pause. That would be appropriate. We met 2 hours later. Big conference room. Glass walls. Polished table. Preston was already there. He looked smaller. Tie crooked. Eyes tired. The confidence gone. Jordan sat beside me, calm as ever. Hannah Foster flipped open a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. The TechFlow's team joined remotely, and small talk. Jordan slid the documents forward. Wagner Industrial Solutions retains exclusive ownership of the adaptive production control system, he said evenly. Any sale, transfer, or commercial deployment requires licensing. Silence. Then TechFlow's lead attorney spoke. We've reviewed the documentation, and it's solid. That was it. That was the moment. Everything Preston built his story on collapsed. Patricia closed her eyes briefly. Preston, she said, did you know about this? He stammered. You worked here. We assumed. Assumed. That word ended his career. The negotiation didn't take long. That I wasn't there to burn the house down. That I wanted fairness, licensing fees, royalties, public attribution, and a consulting contract. So TechFlow wouldn't destroy the system by misunderstanding it. 2 weeks later, the deal closed. $275 million. TechFlow got their acquisition. Pinnacle survived, and me, I got something better than money. My name. On my work, Preston was pursuing new opportunities. That's corporate talk for walked out with a box. A month later, I stood at an industry conference. Some young engineer tapped my shoulder. Are you Tom Wagner, the adaptive control patents guy? I nodded. He smiled like he just met a rock star. Your system changed how we run our entire facility. I didn't say much, just smiled, because after 32 years, the guy who swept floors finally got recognized for building the machine. Sometimes the system does work. You just have to document everything and wait.